Okay, we're here to paint a suburban scene in Santa Rosa, California. Actually, not too far from where I live. Just a mundane little street scene here, suburban street corner. So just wanted to do this painting to show you that you can paint a decent scene out of whatever mundane subject, as long as the light and shadow pattern is right, or is as long as the light and shadow pattern is something that you can make interesting. So that's kind of what I was thinking as I was looking around for this composition. So found something I kind of like. The light and shadow pattern is making a decent frame for my subject. So gonna do a quick drawing, just going through and doing our measuring subject. So let's find out what is going to be the focal point here. My focal point is probably going to be where this sidewalk meets this tree here. So it's gonna be a lot of angles to measure because of this being so many man-made objects in the painting. A lot of angles that you want to get right. So do your measurements as best as you can, and just find all the straightest angles first. It'll give you a good start to everything else when you start to get into all the organic shapes with all the curves and stuff. It'll be nice to have solid angles to base everything else around. So this is fan here. The thing about painting vehicles, you never know how long they might last there. But this is an hour-long painting, so hopefully it stays there. But if we do, or if it moves, we'll just change it unless we get to a point where it's solid enough. It's solidly painted enough that we can leave it as is. But hey, these are mostly studies, so if there's a unfinished part, that's okay. Just putting in angles for some of the vehicles I see out there. Using some of my dark colors to draw with. Now I'm just kind of tracing the big angle of the silhouette of the tree. I guess it's not exactly a silhouette if it's in light, but the overall big shape of it. So that's kind of what I'm doing now. Putting in the shape of these large trees. They're the next biggest shape that I could find. And I'll group things as best as I can. These trees start to lose a bit of their shape out here, so when we get to the edge work, I will probably play around with that more. But for now, just indicate them in the drawing. Put the rest of these vehicles in. Backside of this little SUV. Little hydrant. This crosswalk, kind of like the shape or the lines that the crosswalk makes, kind of almost makes an arrow leading into the part of the painting that I want people to spend more time on. So actually bring this car out a little further out here. That might end up being part of my focal point. Okay, well, might be hard to see in the video already, but might be hard to see in the video at this point, but my drawing is pretty much where I need it to be. Once we start filling in the large shapes of color, then it'll start to make more sense, I think. So clear a little space on my palette for a nice light mixture of sky color. And it's still smoky here in Santa Rosa because of all the recent fires as of this recording, so not putting a lot of blue in the mix. Well, actually there ended up being more in my mixture here, but that's okay. Should grab a bit more paint here so that moves easier on my canvas. So that should be a lot more white and yellow. Just a hint of blue, actually. Just using a nice strong bristle brush to grab a lot of paint and put it on my subject. Okay, so that's going to be the light part of the painting. Other than the highlights, that will be the lightest thing. So let's find where it's going to be our dark shapes that we want. Take this mixture, put it aside, save it. We got a fresh area to mix our darks in. Don't want the light pigments to contaminate our darks too much. So mixture of burnt sienna and viridian. It's not the darkest we can go. I want to save that for later, but I think in there, this mass of green trees, green foliage, will serve as a good base of color for the shape. And just like to add that into the rest painting where I see light or where I see shadows. I was thinking about the light when I was saying that, because I'm thinking about where the light and shadow is going to meet. It's a little bit of compositional no. I made 2 or 3 really similar shapes stacked on top of each other. Find yourself doing that. Figure out a way to vary that shape, or else it's going to look too unnatural. Okay. One thing you want to try and do when blocking in the darks in your composition is to link your dark shapes so that when you squint at your painting, all the dark values are in a single mass. This won't always happen, but it's a good way to see that your composition is working or not. So these shadows are helping me do that. These are all casted from the tree, and it goes across my whole painting, or I should say at least 3/4 of it. Just kind of using a dark version of like the local colors that I see. It's bright sunlight, so it's going to be high contrast. And so, make sure that the light side is a lot lighter than the dark side. Start that out with darks. A little bit lighter mixture to make the shadows of these cars. They're all white and silver. So they're still going to be darker than anything in the light, but lighter than the dark things in shadow. This plane is facing slightly away from the shadow plane, so it's a little lighter. Okay. Switch back to our light brush. Take some of this sky color. Try and mix a color for the sidewalk. Add a little burnt sienna. That's not dark enough. Also not cool enough. Add a little blue back into it. Try and get the color of the pavement in light. Of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. There's a lot of stuff happening back there, but I'll simplify it for now. I can always come back in and add more detail. The sidewalk, it's a little bit concrete color, but it's actually reading as browner than my pavement was. So same mixture, just a little more burnt sienna in it. The lawn, start with permanent green light and mix it into that same color just to tone it down slightly. Make it a little more natural. Let's see. This little piece of lawn there as well. Okay. Lights of the trees. Take permanent green light, cadmium yellow. Make a mixture out of that. See what we get. That's actually pretty close to what I'm seeing there. taking the overall shape and making one mixture for it. That is the brightest tree, so the one next to it, it's a little greener, a little less saturated, so add some Viridian and a little bit of burnt sienna to make this color. Squinting at the scene, one next to it is browner and a little darker, so scrumming it in kind of because it's a foliage, so give it a little bit of indication of texture at this early stage. Just saw this little shape back there. There's like a roof and a distant tree. Probably should have switched to my other brush before doing that, but I'm seeing some stuff back here when I squint. So I'll put in these small dark shapes back here. A couple of light shapes back here. Put those in. Crosswalk. It's pretty light. Those lines in. I could put those in later too, but I just saw them there. Just looking for anything I missed. There's some strip of grass there. Shape foliage that comes down here. Side of this house. It's a little yellow. Okay, that's blocked in everything. Pretty much filled up the entire canvas with paint. Anything I missed? We'll start to, even though we already did kind of do a light and dark block, and come in and determine the light and dark side of each shape here. So start with the first thing I blocked in, which was this mass of trees over here. Noticing that it's a darker, cooler green that makes up the shadow side. So just kind of squinting and looking at the shape of that dark side. It's almost all dark, but you can actually look and see that there are different variations of shape within that shadow. So that's all I'm blocking in there. This tree is doing the same thing. within this shape, I see a lot of dark pieces, but I won't worry about that yet. I'll come in and do the darker side of this tree that's in front of it. So this is starting to help show the direction of the light, the way it's shining on everything. That's going to be a big help to give the illusion of sunlight in our painting. So my shadows, I'm painting pretty saturated, not a lot of browns in them, not even a lot of complementary mixtures, just painting these shadows at high saturation will give a good contrast when I paint the lights at a lower saturation, when there's a lot more white color. Like the dark side of this vehicle here, this SUV. There are variations in it, but I'll leave it all simple for now. Dark of this wheel. And the back window. This little hatchback of some sort. Down there. It's a fire hydrant. I'll indicate just one shape. Okay. These dark shadows. Back in. Getting a little glare here. Okay. This plane on the car is interesting because it's reflecting a lot of green of the lawn into it. So that's why I'm putting that color into it. I do observe it. So I'm actually noticing something that might change the way I approach this painting. This is actually becoming more of a focal point. It's this van, and although I do like it, I'm hoping that it stays there for the duration of this painting, or else I'm gonna end up with a painting where the focal point is unfinished, but we'll see. One advantage of learning to paint landscapes in an hour is that you have less of a chance of your scene changing so much. So without even really thinking about it, I started moving into painting the light side of the shadow. So that's what I'm doing now. There's a truck back here though, kind of blocking in as well. Okay. There's a lot of different things happening um, in the composition back here. There's a house, so I'm like kind of indicating the garage. I'm gonna try and leave it loose. Don't want too much attention taken from everything else, because it's one thing to be able to see it with your eyes, and then to be able to translate it into paint as something that reads to your audience can be a different matter entirely. So that's all I'm doing, is just making a slight indication at what's going on back there. It's kind of a blue house. So. As time goes by, my showers are actually going to get longer, which hopefully doesn't change the composition too much. But as we get to the later phase of the painting, be able to decide what to do from there. Painting the shapes of the car negatively, kind of, or like the parts on the body of the car, such as like the tires and everything. So gives a better indication of the shapes rather than trying to draw them in. Tree here. Paint that branch in. Mailbox or something. It's probably too early to put that in, but oh well. There's also a tree here. That's the trunk of this one that comes up. Well, that's good to know. All right. There's a stop sign right here too. Pole of this in here. black bumper and the grill. That van. So using a nice sharp brush that will hold its chisel tip well is pretty essential for being able to paint these man-made objects in a nice crisp way. So this happens to be a Princeton polytip bristle brush. I know it's not something I indicate that you should get in the supplies, but if it's something you feel like you're going to paint a lot of sharp angles in your work, it's worth picking up some of these stiffer brushes. So, okay. Do the light side in a more substantial way. Oops. Actually, I'll switch to a clean brush. Okay. Squinting, noticing what's still lighter in the light side. The shape. So, okay. Well, that's bright enough that maybe it will still be the focal point as we keep going. So we'll see. Might have spoke too soon about the van over there. But although, as we add more of these light shapes in, maybe this won't be as big a focus. So all I'm doing with this is just indicating where I notice there's a large enough difference between the contrast that I know there's a definite light shape to contrast against the shadows. A few of them here and there. Dappling the light. Okay. Got sidewalk dips. This actually saved for the comparison phase, but I'm noticing that this is darker than I initially put down. Well, that's okay. It's an easy fix. A light on the vehicles will probably be the last part of the blocking. Rim light on the hydrant. Okay, that concludes the establishment phase. So we'll get into comparing everything we put down next. Time to compare the values and colors we got here and make any adjustments we might need. Establishment looks pretty good for the most part. I don't think I want to do any changes to the color of the sky there, so just keep going from there. My colors and values are actually pretty good, I think. So I imagine my adjustments will mostly be shape and composition related. Or if my scene in front of me changes enough that I want to make any changes there. That a little warmer, a little more violet. Do see some blues back there too. Okay. There are some more oranges I'm noticing in the foliage. I don't want to like totally change the entire shape color, so I'm just kind of dabbing in sprinkles of orange into there just to give that optical mixing feel to it. Just a few little changes here and there. Let's see, any changes in the foliage here? There are planes in trees, so if you were to look at a tree as a solid object, you'd be able to, or like mass all the leaves together as a solid object, you would see the planes more clearly, but they're there. You just need to observe them and notice it. Like I'm noticing kind of reflected light into some of these leaves back here, so that's what I'm indicating. It's really not a lot that I need to change. Foliage. Just maybe some slight warm and cool variations, but my values back here are so dark that I don't need to make a big difference. And even if I try, the values are so much in the dark that it's all just going to change the hue rather than any value jumps. So that's good. Definitely don't want any value jumps inside of the dark masses. Noticing a few color changes in the lights. Couple more highlights back there. Expand on these so they don't look like out of place dots. So a nice little thing that's happening here is that I'm actually kind of linking these lights together, which is also great. In the establishment phase, we linked the dark, so comparison phase, we're linking the lights. It doesn't always work out that way, but it's a nice little side benefit. Okay, these were a little light and not green enough, so I'm adding some green and colors to slightly knock down the value. Noticing more yellows and oranges. The foliage, so putting that in there. Noticing also some reds, some alizarin, and violet. Light side. These values of these dark blues back here can go a little lighter just to indicate a little distance. There's like some houses back here, a trailer. Don't really feel like trying to really work out that trailer, so I'm just going to indicate it back here. A little color variation. This tree is closer and darker, so sure that reads as well. This tree here, same thing. Green. A lot more green than I observed in the block-in. Changing that up a bit. Okay. There are some dark shapes within this tree that I did not paint in the block in. So I'm doing that now. A little variation, color. It's like red foliage behind it, which gives me a nice little opportunity to make some color contrast back here. Oops, is that too blue? Went with blue to darken it because green and red will make a brown. I didn't want to go brown yet. There are some darker green shapes in here that you really have to squint at and observe to see the shapes of it. But as you put those more and more of those in, hopefully you will see the structure of your tree start to come together. Ignore all the sky and the branches you might see for now, till you get to the point where there's a sense of solid shapes and structures in your trees. Then you could go in and add in like more individual leaf clusters, branches, and sky holes. Too dark. That's actually not bad. Okay. There's actually a lot of light shapes happening in here, but I don't think I'm gonna paint them all the way I see them. I'll try and give some structure, but I'm not gonna go as light as I see over there. It's just gonna confuse the eye and just take too much focus away. So just making a lighter version of the colors I use for the shadow. Maybe slightly warmer than that, but I want to keep the values a lot closer to the dark than the light side there. All right. Let's make this a nicer shape. This tree's back here. Okay. All right, let's deal with some of these structures on the bottom part of our painting. Sign is metal, so it's reflecting all sorts of neat colors in it. Is it too light? I'll come back in and put some more foliage color back over it. Okay. There's a lot happening back there. I think I'm not going to bother with trying to get it super accurate. There's a lot more interesting parts of the painting to work on, so let's not focus on all that back there. This tree branch in though. It's about right here. Yeah. Tree trunk, I should say. Okay. What else needs to be adjusted? Guess I could start working on the structure of these cars. Not gonna try and fuss too much about the actual colors I'm seeing reflected in the cars. They're very reflective. They're silver or white. So focusing instead on the color temperature shift and the value. And that should get me close enough. Mix up a color of that pavement. Back there again. I'm using that as a negative shape to try and paint the back of that car. We will refine that better in the refinement stage. That's what it's there for. Planes on this car are a lot more subtle. Weird shape. Shouldn't be there. Color of that sidewalk. Just making that a little bit nicer of a shape. Something happening there. Leaves. Anything else I'm noticing that there's more dappling light happening in the shadow back here, but I'm actually just going to leave it as is. And instead, I'm feeling like it's a little lighter than I painted it. Take a little ultramarine and alizarin crimson and repaint this shadow. Try and get it a little bit more luminous. As much as I like the contrast that this really dark shadow gives me, I think it's too dark. Kind of messes with the feeling of sunlight that I got here. You know what? I might add some of that dappled light. I feel like it's kind of needing it at this point. Reestablish that. Also, there's enough variation in the shadow or values in the shadows that lightening it up was actually necessary. Now I look at it. I'm not going to try and copy that exact shape or color of this dappled light. Just want to show that it's happening here. Ultramarine blue and alizarin. In case you missed it. Take some burnt sienna and some of these other gray colors on my palette and put in some of the dappled light coming in through the trees onto the sidewalk. Don't want to make that too bright. See how not white those shapes actually are. Okay. Seeing some reflected light. Bouncing back into this fan. Variation of value within shadow here. Those in there. Oops, that's too bright. Those were too bright and green, so come back in to fix that. Okay, well, pretty okay with that as far as my comparison phase goes. I think I did well enough establishing this that I didn't have to change too much. So, yeah, let's get into the phase of adding the rest of our details. Okay, let's get into the refinement phase, which really is just going to be fixing up little things here and there, adding some extra detail to help the overall just make it a little bit more of a solid painting. Theoretically, every part that you add at this point should be enhancing the painting. It shouldn't be adding more problems for you to fix. I mean, but that's a perfect world. Anytime you add a new stroke to your painting, it could be a potential problem, but the whole point of following the method is that by the time you get to this point, all it's left to do is just add all the enhancements, and it's not detracting from your solid foundation. But that is easier said than done. So now it's reading like a tree back there. We come in and add any more to our silhouettes, refine them, add more sky color back into them to create the shape of the trees. I don't want to go too far into my tree silhouette with the light, even if I see them. Like there's a couple little dots of sky that I'm seeing in here, but problem is if you start to add all these in there, it's going to detract and start to look like polka dots, and it'll kind of mess with your overall silhouette and shape of the tree. It's really important that this big mass stays a big mass for your composition. It helps to keep things better organized and make more sense in the picture. It's one of those little subtle things that you have to change what you see from life into something that makes a better painting. Start to add in these branches and trunks. painting this in autumn, so starting to see some of the leaves change color and fall off. So fingers crossed that the fig leaf doesn't land on my painting or my palette. This orange shape down here doesn't make sense to me anymore, so paint stuff around it and through it. I think it was supposed to be some of the light coming down onto the sidewalk, but my drawing was just a little off, so it was in the wrong spot. It's not really adding anything, so I'll paint right over it. That sidewalk. Okay. Anything else? Little bit, some variation in the shapes of this tree silhouette. Just kind of flicking it on. Using a lot of wrist twirls. Light's changing a bit there. This phase of the painting, do any work on the light side before your light changes, because the longer you go, especially in the afternoon, the more shadow you will have and therefore less light, and especially highlights. So do the things that will change quickest first. See, sky holes. Careful not to make these branches too dark either. Just barely indicating I'm actually painting right in between my sky holes. And just doing one stroke for each branch there. Come back down here, do kind of the same thing. Be really subtle about it. Okay. Some of these highlights are actually gone, but I can still see a little bit of where they should be. So I'll just paint them how I remember seeing. before. A little bit of detail in this wheel, tire. Rest of the highlights into this car. Little bit of detail in the tire. Don't really feel like doing too much detail on that tire, or else it's just going to start to distract a bit. Hydrant. Add a little detail just to make it read a little bit more like a hydrant. Top side plain. The lights in. Kind of missed that in this one. Orange is actually a little warmer than red, at least in this painting. So using orange, just a pure bright cadmium orange to indicate the light side. And then the red will be our dark side. A little bit of alizarin in that red though. Just a little highlight. Very careful. There's a cast shadow on this hydrant that I missed. Okay. Any little details I missed on this van here. Little variation in value and color. Try and paint the headlight. Just squinting at these headlamps. You really don't have to do too much to them. I think people will understand by inferring everything around it what these are, but just so that they're not little empty spots on your vehicle. It's doing a little bit, just enough to show what they are. It's little variations in the light plane. Oops. Okay. People getting home from work, so stuff might change here. So it's a good thing we're getting close to done. License plate. Actually, there's a more suitable brush for that. This might be a little better. When you make a mistake by painting a shape too large, a lot of times it's just better to paint the negative shape around it to cut it back down. I cut it down too much, so for it again. All right. Not a super critical thing to paint anyway, so don't stress about it. Little highlight. Just trying to reinforce the shape that I see here. There's a shadow side to this pole. Put that in. A little highlight running down it. That's fine. Not perfect. So indicate it. All right. Last we'll do this stop sign. So white shapes in shadow outdoors tend to go like a cooler and bluer shade. So that's what we're doing now. Instead of trying to paint a too white, just remember that there's a lot of sky color reflected into your shadow shapes, especially light ones that will catch all that color. It's a stop sign. So I didn't try to make it legible there on purpose. Anytime you add lettering into a painting, it's something that your brain immediately wants to look at and make sense, or just kind of wired that way with how we understand language. So if you don't want lettering to actually be the focus of anything, you got to make it just illegible enough. In this painting, I don't want people's first read to be the word stop. Get that highlight a little too chunky. So I have to cut into it. Um, what I probably should have did was put the highlights in after this was dry, but oh well, this is practice. Anything else? A little bit of reflected light in this mailbox. Am I alright with the rest of this van? Small details in the van. Little color variations I missed. But, yeah. One thing I'm not crazy about is this thickness on that stop sign, but other than that, I think I'm pretty okay with where it is now. Actually, that's bothering me slightly. Oops, that's too cool. Okay, so I think I got pretty good sense of the light that I wanted to capture when I looked at this scene. So overall, pretty successful. Yeah, just remember to simplify all these unnecessary details, especially all the stuff that's happening back here. You can totally just leave it like little shapes and dabs and it will read. Just try and spend all the time on the things that matter most in a scene like this. So type of scene like this will really challenge you to edit and make smart decisions on where to focus your time. But yeah, you can easily make a otherwise pretty mundane scene into something that is eye-catching just by light composition and a little bit of structure. All right, that's it.